Mr. Carter, I'm going to ask you one last time. Please step off the plane. Captain Reynolds stood firm at the front of the cabin, flanked by two uniformed security officers and a pair of flight attendants. His tone was measured, almost polite, but the unspoken message was clear. Leave or be removed. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He felt every set of eyes burning into him, the weight of judgment pressing down. I need to understand why. What's the issue? The pilot's smile didn't waver. We reserve the right to remove anyone who makes the crew uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. The word hung in the air, thick with implication. Passengers murmured. Some pulled out their phones, but no one spoke up. Nina's fingers tightened around Elijah's. The little boy's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked between his father and the uniformed men blocking their way. Something was deeply wrong, and Malcolm knew it. Malcolm inhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady. What safety concern? The flight attendants exchanged glances, but no one gave a direct answer. This isn't personal, sir, the pilot replied smoothly. We simply need to ensure a comfortable experience for everyone on board. Elijah's small voice broke through the tense silence. Did we do something wrong? Nina knelt beside him, forcing a smile. Of course not, sweetheart. But Malcolm saw the way her fingers trembled against their son's back. The pilot's patience thinned. I'm asking you nicely. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder for whom? The silence was deafening. A businessman shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, pretending not to hear. A woman near the front discreetly angled her phone, recording. A flight attendant's gaze flickered with something. Guilt? Hesitation, but she said nothing. Passengers whispered in hushed tones, but no one spoke out. Malcolm scanned the crowd, searching for even a single ally. Nothing. His pulse hammered against his ribs. The weight of their silence was suffocating, heavier than the accusations hanging in the air. They were alone, and everyone else was content to let them be. A flight attendant stepped forward, voice clipped. Sir, we need you to comply. Now. The security officers shifted, bracing for resistance. Nina clutched Elijah to her chest, her eyes pleading with Malcolm. She didn't have to say it. He already knew. Defiance would only escalate things. The lead flight attendant's tone hardened. If you don't leave willingly, we will be forced to remove you. Elijah's small fingers dug into his mother's arm. Daddy? His voice wavered. Malcolm's stomach clenched. This moment would stay with his son forever. Slowly, deliberately, he unclenched his fists. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a fight. Stepping into the aisle, he kept his chin high, refusing to shrink under their gaze. As Malcolm stepped past the pilot, he met his smirk with an unreadable expression. Passengers averted their eyes, some ashamed, others indifferent. The pilot let out a breath, as if relieved. Wise choice. But Malcolm wasn't finished. He turned, voice low, controlled. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The smirk faltered. Then, the door shut behind them. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Dad, do you think they'll let me see the cockpit? Elijah's eyes sparkled with excitement as he tugged at Malcolm's sleeve. Malcolm chuckled. Maybe, champ. You'll have to ask the pilot yourself. Beside them, Nina adjusted her purse strap. As long as you remember your manners. The Carters moved through the airport, blending into the steady stream of travelers. To the outside world, they were just another family, headed for a vacation. But experience had taught them that appearances didn't always shield them from assumptions. Today would be no different. Sir, are you checking in for economy or first class? Malcolm slid their passports forward without hesitation. First class. The agent's eyebrows twitched upward, but she masked it quickly. People often made assumptions. They saw a black family and didn't picture success. But Malcolm Carter wasn't just a businessman. He was a co-owner of Carter Aviation. His wife, Nina, was the strategic mind behind their empire. Yet, they never led with titles. Respect, Malcolm believed, should be given, not demanded. Unfortunately, the world didn't always operate that way. The TSA agent flipped through their passports. Then again, lips pressing into a thin line. Hold on a moment. A glance to the side, a subtle nod. Another officer stepped forward. Malcolm exhaled slowly. Here we go. Meanwhile, a white family strolled through security unchecked, laughing. Their boarding passes barely glanced at. Problem? Malcolm asked, his voice even. The agent didn't meet his eyes. Routine check. Routine. At the first-class check-in, the gate agent barely concealed her skepticism. Are you sure you're in the right line? Malcolm handed over the tickets without reacting. Nina's fingers brushed against his. A silent reminder. Don't let them get to you. This wasn't new. Malcolm had seen it before, felt it before. But something about today gnawed at him. Elijah, usually carefree, was watching, taking it all in. He shouldn't have to notice these things. Malcolm forced a smile. Almost there, buddy. They reached the gate, slipping into their seats. It was just another flight. Just another day. Still, the feeling remained. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. Elijah, slow down, Nina murmured as the son rushed ahead onto the jet bridge. The excitement in his step faltered the moment they entered the first-class cabin. Warm smiles, polite greetings, none of them directed at the Carters. A flight attendant offered champagne to a couple just ahead of them. Her voice lilting with warmth when her eyes landed on Malcolm and Nina. The smile flattened. Seats are on the left, she said curtly. Malcolm caught the glance Nina gave him. Unspoken, but understood. Elijah, oblivious, climbed into his seat. This plane is awesome, Malcolm exhaled. If only enthusiasm could shield him from reality. Malcolm settled into his seat, adjusting his watch as the man beside him stiffened. A glance, a shift, the slight lean away. Subtle, but unmistakable. Within moments, the man pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared almost instantly. He whispered something. Low, discreet. But Malcolm saw the way her expression flickered before she turned her gaze toward him. Nina, watching from across the aisle, already knew. Malcolm kept his breathing steady, waiting. The businessman cleared his throat, pretending to adjust his cuff. The flight attendant lingered a beat longer, then nodded slightly and disappeared toward the galley. Malcolm didn't have to hear the words. He already knew the script. Sir? Malcolm looked up. The same flight attendant. Her voice was composed, but her eyes held something else. Hesitation, maybe even discomfort. I need to see your boarding pass again. Silence stretched between them, a calculated test. Malcolm reached into his pocket, slow and deliberate, retrieving the crisp ticket he had already presented at the gate. He held it out, his expression unreadable. She took it, glancing at the seat number, the name, flipping it over as if searching for some hidden mistake. A few passengers peeked over, pretending not to eavesdrop. Seconds passed before she handed it back, a clipped nod, her only acknowledgement. Thank you, sir. Nina didn't speak, but her fingers curled around the armrest, knuckles white. Malcolm inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He had seen this before, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. Elijah's small voice cut through the thick tension. Dad, why do they keep looking at us? Malcolm froze for half a second. He had hoped, naively, that Elijah wouldn't notice. With forced ease, he reached over, ruffling his son's curls. Don't worry about it, buddy. Elijah frowned, unconvinced. Nina reached across, squeezing Malcolm's hand, a quiet reminder that they weren't alone in this. Malcolm turned to stare out the window, jaw tightening. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something else. And he knew it wasn't over. Malcolm exhaled slowly. The weight in his chest told him everything he needed to know. He had been here before. The discomfort, the veiled hostility. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a warning, and it was far from over. The intercom crackled to life, cutting through the low hum of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. Due to safety concerns, we need a few passengers to deplane before we can proceed. Malcolm's grip on the armrest tightened. Safety concerns? That wasn't vague at all. Nina tensed beside him. You feel that, she murmured. He did. The shift in the air, the way the words weren't directed at anyone, but somehow they were. Elijah looked up confused. Are we safe, Dad? Malcolm forced a smile, but his gut told him the truth. This wasn't about safety. It was about them. A pair of flight attendants moved with quiet urgency, their stiff postures betraying their discomfort. One stopped beside their row, avoiding direct eye contact. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane. Malcolm didn't move. And why is that? The attendant hesitated. We've received reports of a disturbance. Malcolm exhaled slowly. From whom? Silence. The answer was obvious. The cockpit door swung open, and Captain Reynolds emerged, a practiced smile plastered across his face. Let's not make this difficult, he said smoothly. Voice laced with false patience, passengers exchanged puzzled glances, murmuring among themselves. Nina sat rigid, her pulse hammering. Elijah clung to her side, eyes darting between the adults. Malcolm glanced around the cabin, searching for some sign, anything, that someone would say something, but the whispers were just that. Whispers. Sir, your attitude is becoming aggressive, the pilot said, folding his arms. We don't want any trouble. Malcolm's nostrils flared. There it was, the setup, the stereotype, the script designed to paint him as the problem. Nina's breath hitched. Are you saying we're a threat because we're black? Her voice was steady, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. A collective hush fell over the cabin. The pilot feigned offense, shaking his head. This has nothing to do with race, he said, tone dripping with mock indignation. But his eyes told another story. Malcolm inhaled sharply, willing himself to stay composed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. One wrong move, and he'd give them exactly what they wanted. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. Sir, please comply so we can avoid further escalation. Further escalation. As if he had escalated anything, Malcolm's fingers curled into his palm. This was a game he had played before, but the stakes were higher now. Elijah was watching, and Malcolm refused to let his son see him broken. A few passengers fumbled for their phones, the soft glow of screens capturing the unfolding injustice. This isn't right, someone murmured, but no one spoke loud enough to make a difference. Malcolm scanned the faces around him, searching for an ally. Someone who would stand up and say what they all knew to be true. But silence reigned. A uniformed officer appeared at the front of the cabin. A warning, a message. This could get worse. Sir, the flight attendant repeated, voice clipped. Please don't make this harder. Malcolm's jaw clenched. He had no options, only outcomes. Nina gripped his arm. Malcolm. A quiet plea. He met her gaze, then looked at Elijah, who shrank against her side, his small hands gripping her sleeve. Malcolm exhaled sharply. He knew what he had to do, but that didn't make it any less painful. Elijah's small fingers clutched at his mother's sweater, his breathing uneven. Are they arresting us? Nina's heart cracked. No, baby, she whispered. We're leaving. Security loomed over them, an unspoken threat hanging in the air. Malcolm rose slowly, a deliberate act of control over his own body, over the rage simmering beneath the surface. He wouldn't give them a reason. As they stepped into the aisle, the murmurs grew, but still, no one stopped it. The flight attendant's expression remained unreadable. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, as if they had a choice. Shame burned through Malcolm, but he buried it. This wasn't over. He cast one last glance around the cabin, at the faces turned away, at the cameras still rolling. They wanted him humiliated. They were about to learn their mistake. The heavy thud of the airplane door sealing shut echoed in Malcolm's chest. Then his phone buzzed. A text from his business partner. "Malcolm, I just saw what happened. It's all over the internet." His pulse quickened. This wasn't just another incident. It was proof. They had tried to take his dignity, but they had just handed him something far more powerful. A reason to fight back. Malcolm exhaled slowly, his fingers steady as he pressed a familiar number. The dial tone barely rang once before a voice answered. "Malcolm, everything all right?" "No, Greg, we have a problem." Silence, then a shift, casual concern turning razor sharp. "Talk to me." Malcolm didn't waste words. "Your airline just threw my family off a flight for being black." The pause stretched, waited, then, "Tell me exactly what happened." Malcolm laid it out cold and precise. No embellishments, no pleading. Just the truth. By the time he finished, Greg's voice was tight. "Who was the pilot?" "Captain Reynolds." The reaction was instant. "Give me 5 minutes." The call ended, but Malcolm knew the conversation was far from over. Beside him, Nina gripped his arm. "Who was that?" He met her gaze. "The CEO." Elijah blinked up at him. "Are they in trouble now?" Malcolm's jaw set. "Oh, they're about to be." Inside the cabin, a flight attendant stiffened as the earpiece crackled. "Wait, what?" Her gaze flicked toward the cockpit. The color drained from her face. Near the front, the gate agent rushed in, scanning the first-class cabin before locking eyes with Captain Reynolds. His expression darkened as she whispered something urgent. Passengers stirred, sensing the disruption. Whispers traveled from row to row, speculation rippling through the cabin like a slow-moving wave. The pilot's fingers curled into fists. "You're kidding me." The gate agent shook her head. "Orders from corporate. They want you on the phone. Now." Reynolds scoffed, but the smugness had drained from his tone. "Over one passenger?" The agent's voice dropped lower. "Not just any passenger. Malcolm Carter." Reynolds' confidence wavered. His mind reeled, grasping for damage control. But it was already too late. The phone in the cockpit rang with an urgency that sent a chill down Reynolds' spine. He snatched it up. "Reynolds." The voice on the other end was clipped, furious. "What the hell did you just do?" A bead of sweat formed at his temple. There was a safety concern. "Cut the crap," the voice barked. "You put the company at risk. Do you have any idea who Malcolm Carter is?" Reynolds swallowed hard. I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," the CEO spat. "And now the footage is everywhere. You just created a PR disaster." His grip tightened on the receiver. He turned back toward the cabin, his gaze locking onto the first-class section, where passengers now openly stared, some shaking their heads. A flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Carter, we didn't realize who you were." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. His stare was unblinking. "And that would have changed what exactly?" The weight of those words hung thick in the air. And just like that, the realization hit. They had messed with the wrong man. Malcolm stepped forward, his voice measured but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You shouldn't have to realize who someone is to treat them with respect." The silence in the terminal was deafening. A few passengers murmured in agreement, their earlier hesitation melting away, now that the power dynamic had shifted. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, the weight of consequence pressing down on him. The same man who had dismissed Malcolm minutes ago now seemed smaller, his authority stripped away. A corporate representative, summoned in haste, cleared their throat. "Mr. Carter, On behalf of the airline, we deeply regret. Malcolm held up a hand. Spare me the PR script. The rep flinched. Nina, standing beside him, exhaled slowly, watching as the people who had humiliated them now scrambled for damage control. Elijah tugged on Malcolm's sleeve. Does this mean they learned their lesson? Malcolm glanced at the crew. Reynolds, the flight attendants, the gate agents, all shifting uncomfortably under the scrutiny. He let the silence linger a moment longer before answering. They're just starting to. Malcolm stood still, his silence louder than any accusation. Captain Reynolds shifted, his once steady demeanor crumbling under the weight of his own actions. His eyes darted to Malcolm, searching perhaps for understanding, perhaps for an easy way out. None came. Malcolm's voice was calm, deliberate. You expected me to yell, to lash out. That would have made this easier for you, wouldn't it? Reynolds swallowed hard. But I don't need to raise my voice, Malcolm continued. You've already made enough noise for the both of us. The words landed with precision, each one stripping the pilot of whatever authority he had left. A sharp voice broke through the tension. Captain Reynolds. The corporate representative didn't bother with pleasantries. Their expression was unreadable, their tone detached. You're being placed on immediate leave pending an internal review. The blood drained from Reynolds' face. Wait, this decision is final. Flight attendants stiffened, realizing the storm had shifted directions. Their nervous glances darted between Reynolds and Malcolm. The same man they had treated as disposable was now the most powerful presence in the room. Reynolds opened his mouth, grasping for defense, but there was none. The verdict had been delivered, and for once, there was no escaping accountability. A gate agent approached, her previous indifference now replaced with forced politeness. Mr. Carter, we'd like to personally invite you and your family back onto the flight. Malcolm didn't move right away. He let the moment breathe, let them feel the weight of their reversal. When he finally stepped forward, it wasn't with triumph, it was with quiet certainty, the kind that needed no validation. As he passed Reynolds, he didn't spare him a glance. The pilot, once so smug, now looked smaller, diminished. Nina squeezed Elijah's hand. We belong here, she whispered. Her words weren't just for their son. They were for everyone listening. Malcolm paused at the boarding door, turning back. His voice was steady, almost casual. Before I go, Captain. Reynolds barely lifted his head. This is my airline, Malcolm said, each syllable precise. You work for me. The impact was immediate. Passengers inhaled sharply. Flight attendants went rigid. Reynolds' face drained of all color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Then applause. Not hesitant, not forced, just pure, resounding approval. Malcolm turned, stepping onto the plane with his family. This time they weren't just passengers. They were a statement, a reckoning, a reminder. Respect should never be earned through status, wealth, or fear. It should be given freely, without question. Because when dignity is conditional, injustice thrives. And today, it stops here. If this had happened to you, if you were humiliated, silenced, treated as less, how would you have reacted? Would you have spoken up? Would you have fought back? Think about it.